parable of the sower, the different grounds, that's it's convenient. It's a good analogy for the theme that we've been talking about for several weeks about spiritual disciplines, because the four different types of soil, represent sort of the gospel would explain to us the conditions of your heart, whether or not you're able to receive, a word from God or a correction, or you're able to receive a blessing or not in some way. Depends on, the condition of the soil of your heart and what's there. And so a great way to think of spiritual disciplines is that it's like cultivating a field, right? You intentionally and regularly in a disciplined manner perform certain habits and rituals and behaviors in your life so that your soul is not, rocky ground, so that there's not thorns and thistles everywhere, so that it is, well-tilled and receptive. And that's the idea behind all the different spiritual disciplines that the church sort of encourages us to do and provides for us. Today, I want to talk about the spiritual discipline of charity, or the spiritual discipline of works of mercy, what they're called. The word charity simply just, it just means love. It's sort of the old word for love, to do charity to somebody. And then works of mercy is another way to call it. There's like the traditional sort of like corporeal works of mercy, right? To clothe the naked, to feed the hungry, to give home to the homeless, to bury the dead, and it goes on and on. There's all these things. And really, what at the root of this particular discipline is that when the word mercy, of works of mercy, it's the same word that we get alms from. When we talk about almsgiving, right? Almsgiving is just a Latinized corruption of the word mercy, which in Greek is, like we say, the Lord have mercy, like, Kyrie eleison. Like eleison, this word for mercy, the word mercy literally means, if you translate it as literal as possible, it means sort of like loving kindness, or like a kindness, right? Which implies a sort of like gentleness and this sort of kind of emotive factor that's in sort of these works of mercy. And I think that's good because, at the root of this, the motive for doing works of mercy to somebody or performing deeds of charity is this identification of suffering or misery in somebody else. And you identify it, and then you are moved to somehow alleviate that or remove that suffering from them in some way. And that really describes sort of Christ. So often in the Gospels, there's this phrase that gets repeated where Christ encounters somebody, and then it says he was what? Moved to compassion, right? It comes up again, moved to compassion, over and over again. And always followed by this move to compassion is what? Action, in some way. He does something practical for that person to alleviate their suffering in some way. And that's important too, because so often, our aspirations for doing good to others stop at sort of good feelings and thoughts. And that's really not quite enough, but we're called to actually do something and hopefully give in some way sacrificially of our time or labor or money in order to alleviate someone else's suffering in some way. And that's really at the heart of this. And so the goal of this Christian duty to do charity to others is the goal to cultivate, well, there's a few goals, but one of them is to cultivate the virtues of generosity, right? And this sort of disposition of compassion, that's sort of your disposition. Now, giving money and time and sacrificing in these ways, and it depends. Some people are rich in time, some people are rich in money, and whatever we're rich in, that is what we give. It can be difficult, right? We can make up a lot of excuses along the ways, like I'm busy, or it's hard, or sometimes we're moved to compassion, but then we think, will it do any good? Or this person's just going to keep doing their bad behaviors, that got them there in the first place, or whatever. We can come up with a lot of excuses that prevent us from doing the works of mercy for somebody who is in need. And at the root of a lot of these things is fear. Fear is usually at the root of it. I mean, sometimes it's greed. Like, you know, we have all these plans for how we want to spend our money and what we want to do for ourselves and stuff. But really, usually at the root of it is like when it comes down to like, I just can't do that thing, is that we're afraid, right? Maybe we're afraid to give our time because maybe we're afraid to get close to somebody, right? Because it's uncomfortable or weird, or we're afraid of getting hurt in some way, or it's just uncomfortable. Or we're afraid to give our money because we're afraid we won't have enough or something like that. And a lot of these fears are really exaggerated and out of proportion. Usually when we can gain some perspective, it makes these fears go away. And what Christ teaches us in the Gospels is that the things that we're often afraid of are not the things that we should, and there's things that we don't fear that we should be afraid of. And he talks specifically, like, don't fear, you know, him who can destroy your body, but him who can destroy your soul. And so we shouldn't be afraid of going hungry or being physically poor, but we should be afraid of spiritual poverty. We should be afraid of our soul sort of rotting away inside of our body, and so the things that are more important being neglected, and so that we can be living in a human body but lacking humanity. And that this is what we should be afraid of. And you know, I think you see this sort of you ever encountered anybody who's been in, I mean, really severe, dark addiction, right? Like way down in there. You know, it's like addiction, I mean, even biologically, they'll talk about this. It has a way of sort of like hijacking your whole nervous system, you know, and reprogramming the way you think and behave. And it's as if you're like possessed, you know, like even from like a biological standpoint, you know, you've been sort of taken over by this substance. And that's why in the ancient world, you know, that they called people possessed all the time, because it totally manifests this characterization of like you have somehow like drifted back into the background of your consciousness and someone else is running the show. And that is a very dark and scary thing, to sort of like lose yourself, almost literally, you know, and addictions, and whatever the substance can be. There's all kinds of them, right? Sugar or food can be a substance too, it doesn't matter. That's a scary thing, to kind of lose yourself in that way. And that's what we should really be afraid of. And when we think of doing works of charity and giving up our time and money, what we're doing is we're making an investment in our own spiritual life. So we're in a way buying virtue for ourselves by doing this. And if we think of it that way, it will make it easier to do the giving. And it's also important, the fathers remind us of this, and I've talked about this before when we talked about stewardship, is this idea that, and this is firmly within the Christian tradition. Jesus talks more about money and how you and I use our money and how society misuses its wealth to oppress the weak. He talks more about that than any other topic in the Gospels. And the Christian teaching is that you only own things in common. You do not own anything for yourself. Nothing you have belongs solely to you, to use however you wish, but that we own everything in common for the common good, and that you and I are just sort of stewards and caretakers of wealth to use for the benefit, you know, of ourselves and for the world that we live in. And that is a really, really hard truth to embrace. I mean, we can agree to it in our mind, but to embrace it, to let it really sink in and to embrace it into our whole life and to live that out is very difficult. And that's why we take this injunction by Christ to do works of mercy and charity to others, that we have to make it into a discipline. Because if we just rely on sort of the spontaneous sort of random opportunities that just kind of come into our lives to do charity to others, it won't be enough. And that's important. It's important to be the kind of person that is on the lookout for the needs of others, that is open and sensitive to God's Spirit, so that when an opportunity comes or someone comes into your life, that you don't miss it, and that you're ready to give and to do the good thing, to make the sacrifice necessary for that person that God's brought into your life. That's good, okay? But what we need planned charity. We need to not just wait for opportunities, but we have to create our own opportunities to do works of mercy. And so how do we do this? I mean, let's break it up into two basic ways. We have giving of our time and energy and giving of our money. And when we think of time or energy, we're thinking of, very practically, we're talking about volunteering, right? To find either an organization or a nonprofit or a church where you can volunteer your time and give of your time to do good in some way. And to be, and more specifically, to find your niche. I think that's important. I think in churches, in communities, or if you have a connection with some sort of organization that does good, to find your particular job that you do. And that's what you do. Like every Saturday I go and I do X, Y, and Z for this place, And having that is good, and it becomes a regular thing. And so, just like with giving money, when we talk about giving money, that we should not just give money when there's an appeal or someone's asking for it, but to give it proactively and intentionally, which means giving it proportionally to the wealth that we have. So maybe I give 3 or 5 or 10%, whatever it is. I give it regularly. I give a specific amount, right? It's like anytime you set goals, you want them to be specific. You want them to be regular. You want them to be measurable in some way. And so you do the same thing with your money. You can do the same thing with your time. You want to be specific about where you're giving your time and to be something that is a regular occurrence. I go and I volunteer and I do this thing every week, or every year I go and I help out with the bake sales when they come, and I come and I do that, right? Or I give every week, I give $50 every week, I give $200 every month, or something like that, right? Whatever it is, right? You set into yourself patterns and behaviors. It's just like brushing your teeth. You get up, you brush your teeth in the morning, you brush your teeth at night. That's just what you do, and you don't overthink it. And I think one of the dangers when it comes to giving money or time or doing these works of mercy for other people is that we can talk ourselves out of it by overthinking it. We should just do it, to just do it without hesitation. And that takes discipline. But the whole point of taking this and making it a discipline in our life, that we're giving regularly to something, that we're giving our time and our money in some sort of like disciplined fashion, is that this will help us to truly cultivate generosity. So that over time, we will find ourselves, when someone's in need, we're able to give in a sacrificial way. And it's easy. It becomes the automatic thing, right? We're changing sort of our default setting of what we would normally do, that our default is now generosity and compassion and action without fear, that we have courage to do this. And that is the goal of sort of having a spiritual discipline of giving, of doing charity, and of works of mercy in our life. And what's nice is that the church programs a lot of this for us, right? It gives us all kinds of opportunities to volunteer throughout the year. It gives us all kinds of opportunities for causes and things to give to. Just like with prayer, it gives us all these opportunities to pray. And so it sets up, it does a lot of the work for us, and we just have to simply plug ourselves into that. And that's a great help, because you and I are not left to just sort of like make everything up on our own, to figure it all on our own. We have the church to come along and to help us. And so hopefully, by practicing charity in a disciplined fashion, we can make our hearts cultivated so that we're like the good soil that's planted and that things can actually grow there. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Lord.